This hearing of the Subcommittee on Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations will come to order. Today we appeal to President Daniel Ortega. Let imprisoned Catholic Bishop Alvarez go. Release him from prison. Out of an abundance of concern for Bishop Alvarez's welfare and health, let him come to the United States or to the Vatican or somewhere else, or stay right in Nicaragua, where he can again serve the people, preach the good news of the gospel, and care for the weakest and most vulnerable. Bishop Alvarez's life and ministry has been an inspiring example of compassion, kindness, integrity, and selfless service. In his homilies, he speaks of an enduring gratitude and, quote, serenity in our hearts that can only come from God, the peace that surpasses all understanding. He encourages us to be, quote, be convinced that everything is happening for our good because God loves us and because we love him. He preaches love and forgiveness, and that, quote, Christ calls his disciples not to harbor resentment and to always forgive, close quote. He conveys hope, holiness, humility to the people of Nicaragua and to the people of the world. Bishop Alvarez is an innocent man enduring unspeakable suffering. Today we appeal to President Daniel Ortega, release him from prison. Let Bishop Alvarez go. We will hear testimony today from members of the church, and thank you for you being here, Ms. Ullmer, who will speak, but in case of the members of the church, who have actually experienced the Ortega regime's oppression firsthand. I want to thank the witnesses for being here to share their stories. I thank you for your bravery, your tenacity and faithfulness in the pursuit of peace and reconciliation, and for inspiring us with your indomitable faith in God. It is crucial that the world hears your voices and learns the truth of what is happening in Nicaragua, including the truth about the prison conditions and treatment of Bishop Alvarez. The international community can no longer turn a blind eye to what is happening to the people of Nicaragua, including and especially people of faith. It has been my experience over the last 43 years as a member of Congress that dictatorships often rely on forgetfulness or compassion fatigue, where there's outrage at first, it begins to abate, and then the terrible misdeeds that are being done by that individual or by his or her regime, then it's just somehow people turn the page. That will not happen here as regards to Nicaragua. The regime, as we know, has closed Catholic radio stations and universities, obstructed access to places of worship, banned public way of the cross processions, and frozen the bank accounts of hundreds of Catholic institutions. Prisoners' requests for Bibles have been denied. Bishops and priests, as well as worshipers, have been harassed and detained, and the religious order of sisters founded by Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the Missionaries of Charity, has been expelled. Bishop Alvarez is now, we think, the only known cleric to remain imprisoned by the regime, and it's time to let him go. Just last month, 12 priests were sent from imprisonment in Nicaragua to exile in the Vatican. Bishop Alvarez was not among them. Why? Bishop Alvarez has consistently encouraged Nicaraguans not to fall into the temptation of despair and instead be, quote, and this is his words, inundated with the hope of Christ who defeated death. Does this sound like a man who is guilty of treason or any crime? Of course not. I would like to share some additional words from the bishop spoken in a homily after he was placed under house arrest in August of 2022. He said, and I quote, painful experiences do not happen in vain. They don't fall into a void. These experiences are offered to the Lord, and God returns them in blessings for us. Bishop Alvarez encouraged the faithful, saying, and I quote him again, evil is defeated by the power of good. Good is always more powerful. God is eternally powerful. Evil is tremendously limited, even though it makes more noise. Close quote. He also encouraged people to be long-suffering and to die unto oneself, or it, quote, it is the hope of the grain of wheat that dies, that this is the only way it can produce much fruit. Bishop Alvarez admonishes all people of goodwill to have hearts full of forgiveness that mirror the mercy of God. I am in awe of his courage, faithfulness, and kindness, and I know so many others in Congress, House, Senate, Democrat, Republican, people in the White House, we are in awe of his goodness and his extraordinary strength. Instead of lashing out in bitterness at his captors, including President Ortega, Bishop Alvarez has called for forgiveness, renewal, and hope. Bishop Alvarez deserves to be respected and revered and free, not persecuted and incarcerated. We again appeal to President Daniel Ortega, let Bishop Alvarez go. Release him from prison. The video of Bishop Alvarez released this week by the government of Nicaragua raises serious questions and concerns about his well-being. He has lost weight. Is he ill? Is he being provided proper nutrition and basic medical care? We have no idea what is going on day to day. The conspicuous array of food and drink on the two tables in the government video is eerily reminiscent of a trip Congressman Frank Wolf and I made back in 1989 to Perm Camp 35, the infamous Soviet political prison in the Ural Mountains that had the great people like Nathan Sharansky as prisoners there. After meeting and videotaping 24 undernourished, and I mean gaunt, undernourished prisoners, the camp warden took us to the cafeteria. Every table had an abundance of food on it. Some had bites of bread that were half eaten as if there was a fire drill, and everybody ran out the door. And the garbage cans were filled with overflowing with excess food. An absolute Potemkin village, and we let them know that nobody was fooled by such a charade. There are many questions that demand answers, and I suspect that the answers will only paint a more dire picture of the bishop's imprisonment in La Modelo, one of Latin America's most notorious prisons. I would note parenthetically, I've repeatedly requested to be able to visit Bishop Alvarez. Bianca Jagger and others who have joined in. We've asked, let us go see him. And that is, we haven't even gotten a response. I asked the United States government, and that includes Congress and, of course, the executive branch, as I did in our subcommittee hearing in March, is the United States doing enough? Delay is denial when you're languishing and suffering in a prison. Sickness and all kinds of horrible things can happen to people in a prison, particularly a political prison. The United States needs to act quickly and use every single tool at our disposal. We have passed the Nicaragua Human Rights and Anti-Corruption Act of 2018, the Nicaraguan Investment Conditionality Act, and the Reinforcing Nicaragua's Adherence to Conditions for Electoral Reform Act. They're good. I'm glad we have. We're all part of that. It was a bipartisan effort. Despite the regime's egregious human rights abuses, however, Nicaragua remains a member of the Dominican Republic Central American Free Trade Agreement, or CAFTA-DR. Congress needs to seriously re-examine Nicaragua's membership in CAFTA-DR in light of the current situation and consider the full scope of economic tools at our disposal. So again, today, with these amazing witnesses that will, in a moment, be providing expert testimony, we appeal to President Ortega, let Bishop Alvarez go. I'd like to, my good friend and colleague, Ms. Wild, will be back momentarily. She had another hearing where she had to make some comments and check in, but she will be right back, as other members will be here shortly as well. So I would like to introduce our witnesses, beginning first with, and we're doing this for obvious reasons. I mean, you see that there's a barricade for privacy. We know that there is always the concern about retaliation, so thank you again for your bravery for being here. But prisoner of conscience number 1 is a Nicaraguan national, a member of the Catholic Church who's been criminally convicted by the regime and now living in exile. Prisoner of conscience number 2 is a Nicaraguan national, a member of the Catholic Church who has been criminally convicted by the regime. Again, when I say criminally, these are political convictions, and also living in exile. We have a parent of a prisoner of conscience. She is a Nicaraguan national, member of the Catholic Church, and a relative of a prisoner of conscience in Nicaragua. Deborah Ullmer is the regional director for the Latin America and Caribbean at the National Democratic Institute. She has served as the chief of party for the USAID Office of Transition Initiatives program in Nicaragua. Ms. Ullmer has spent approximately 12 years working and living in Latin America. She earned her BA from my state, I'm happy to say, political science and modern languages from Seton Hall University, and graduate courses in Latin American studies at the American University School of International Service. I would like to now yield to my good friend and colleague, Congresswoman Mild.
Timing is everything. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this important hearing today. To our witnesses, thank you for your courage in testifying here today. You have endured unimaginable sacrifices, and we stand with you in solidarity. Since this subcommittee's previous hearing in March on the human rights crisis in Nicaragua, the Ortega Murillo regime has continued to operate through the patterns we documented in that last hearing, stifling the voices of the Nicaraguan people by suppressing all forms of dissent, criminalizing civil society, and flagrantly violating international law by stripping Nicaraguan political prisoners of their citizenship. Bishop Rolando Alvarez remains imprisoned in appalling conditions on a 26-year sentence, along with other faith leaders, human rights activists, and opponents of the regime of all political stripes and backgrounds. And last week, the Ortega Murillo's withdrawal from the Organization of American States officially took effect, further isolating the country from the surrounding region and the world at the same time as it deepens relations with authoritarian governments in Russia and beyond. In a spirit of partisanship and solidarity, in a spirit of partnership and solidarity, not interference, I commit to our brave witnesses today and their family members my dedication to continuing to work together to ensure that the people of Nicaragua are not forgotten. Together, let us redouble bipartisan efforts in defense of the people of Nicaragua. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now ask our first exiled prisoner of conscience number 1, if you could provide your testimony.
From my point of view, the problem we have in Nicaragua began with the pastoral letter of May 21st, 2014, in which the bishops raised problems of social, political, and economic nature in Nicaragua, with the aim that these aspects were taken seriously into account by the government for a better coexistence and to work for a real peace in Nicaragua. I was kidnapped. Why do I say this? Because the proper procedures were not followed. I was not shown a court order. There was no prior investigation. Everything was arbitrary, and I was even arrested in the street by 2 members of the police and 6 members of the security troops who accompanied me to the police unit, where I was later transferred to the El Chipote prison. I was interrogated, and I was accused of giving hate speeches, of organizing an uprising. I was following orders from Monsignor Rolando, and they asked me what were those orders. How much money did Bishop Rolando receive from the U.S. government and the European Union? Do you know how much money the bishop and priests received? Who else advised the bishop? Do you know what the clergy did in their meetings? When they met in the parishes, what did they say? Was it really about spiritual retreats, or was it about bad-mouthing the government? Who was in charge of the media? Did we receive money from the Chamorro Foundation, and how much did we receive? One of the prison commissioners asked me in one of those interviews, with whom else do they meet and who do they do it with? Could I give them the name of the priests, lay people, and the positions they had in the organization? They always addressed the Monsignor as if he were the thinking head and the organizer of the failed coup d'etat and of wanting to organize a new coup. The aforementioned shows that the great ignorance that the government and other authorities have of the prophetic role and the evangelical commitment of the bishops. We were accused of being members of an organized crime gang, and that the leaders were the bishops, and above all, they said, Rolando. I was accused of undermining the dignity of the state and of Nicaragua, of spreading false news. I hope that this testimony will be useful for future efforts for the liberation of Monsignor Rolando Alvarez. Thank you.
We're now hearing from exiled prisoner of conscience number 2. And the reason why we're not naming names is obvious, I think, to all, is to protect you and family members and other friends back in Nicaragua.
I am a Nicaraguan. I arrived in the United States on February 9th, 2023. We were 222 expelled from the country, most of them political prisoners, members of human rights organizations, and a group of lay people and priests who had been imprisoned for defending human rights and exercising their prophetic mission of announcing the gospel and denouncing injustices. These injustices increased in April 2018, when armed paramilitary groups and police violently repressed young people who were protesting in the streets of some departments of the country against the social security reforms carried out by the government. Bishop Rolando Alvarez and some of his clergy came to the defense of the demonstrators, and some of the churches served as shelters and clinics for young people fleeing repression and wounded by police and ruling party members. I was kidnapped by the National Police of Nicaragua. I say kidnapped because that day, at 3 in the morning, a group of riot police violently entered the building of the Episcopal Curia, and without presenting any arrest warrant, they took us out of the rooms and placed us in the conference room of the Curia. There were 5 priests, among them the Bishop of the Diocese of Matagalpa, Monsignor Rolando Alvarez Lagos, a deacon, 2 seminarians, and a layman. A total of 9 people who had been locked up for 15 days because on August 4th, the National Police locked them in that building. I was transferred to the cells of the Auxilio Judicial de Managua, a jail better known as the Nuevo Chipote. Our rights were violated because they did not tell us anything about the reason for our arrest. They stripped us naked, forced us to wear prison uniforms, and transferred me to one of the cells. That same day, the interrogations began. There were more than 30 interrogations, which could take place at any time of the day, even in the early hours of the morning. They blackmailed me and threatened the lives of my relatives because they wanted me to declare that the bishop was a member of an organization that wanted to promote a coup d'etat against Daniel Ortega and that he received money from the U.S. government and the European Union. Other interrogations had to do with the homilies that the bishop had said in some Eucharists, and in which, according to them, he was inciting people to rise up to protest against the government. The homilies are all on social networks, and in them, he simply exercises his freedom of expression and advocates for the defense of the human rights of Nicaraguans. It is clear that this is manipulated by the same government that does not like to hear the truth and the voice of the Catholic Church. So from that date began an open persecution of Catholic institutions, such as Caritas and John Paul II University, and more recently, the Central American University, UCA, thus affecting university autonomy and academic freedom in the country. While the interrogations were taking place, the trial against the group that was in the Episcopal Curia was still also taking place. The trial from the beginning was full of irregularities, illegalities, and vices. The prosecutor's office, the police, and the judges colluded so that in the end, the accusation was practically the same for the majority of the 222, including the priests and the bishop. In the same way, once the sentence was pronounced, we were accused of treason, and all our civil rights were taken away to the point of not even presenting us at the civil registry office. As I pointed out earlier, we were taken out of jail on the night of Wednesday, February 8th, around 10:30 p.m., and taken on 3 buses to an unknown destination until we were on the tarmac of the Air Force Airport, and it was explained to us that we were leaving for exile in the United States. When we were in Washington the next day, we realized that the bishop was not on that plane. He is being held in the prison known as La Modelo in Tipitapa, Managua, Nicaragua. I hope that this testimony can be used to negotiate the release of my bishop, Rolando José Alvarez Lagos. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Are just extraordinary. Thank you. I'd like to now recognize a parent of a prisoner of conscience and thank her for being here today.
I will omit my name for security and identify myself as a Nicaraguan in exile. My life and that of my family changed on April 16, 2018, when the government of Nicaragua made reforms to Social Security, at which time my family and I joined the protests along with thousands of Nicaraguans. Since that day, we received threats, persecution, and continuous siege by the police, the Sandinista militants, and paramilitary groups. We participated in different marches, civic sit-ins, and witnessed brutal attacks by the Sandinista police against students and civil society. At the same time, we witnessed the participation of the Catholic Church as a mediator and defender of human rights, and I will now cite some events. In the city of Maragalpa, on May 15th, the Sandinista police and paramilitary groups attacked the young demonstrators, and it was the Catholic priests that interceded and achieved a ceasefire. The Catholic Church opened the doors of its churches to protect the life and integrity of the students and demonstrators. On May 30th, Nicaraguan Mother's Day, a march was organized in support of the mothers of the assassinated youths. Thousands of Nicaraguans participated, and among them my family and myself. And as the march progressed, gunshots were heard. The dictatorship had snipers, and they shot at the civilian population that was participating in the marches. One of my sons and other young people set out to help the wounded. My husband, one of my sons, and I managed to get to our house. However, my other son could not. He took refuge in the cathedral of the Catholic Church. And in the early morning of the next day, my husband and I managed to get them out of the cathedral. One of my sons was kidnapped by paramilitaries in the middle of 2018. And at the time of his kidnapping, 2 Catholic priests were passing by who immediately informed us of the kidnapping. The same day of his kidnapping, my son was transferred to the torture prison El Chipote. The mothers remained outside the prison day and night, accompanied by several priests. We did not know if our sons were alive or dead, and it wasn't until Bishop Rolando Jose Alvarez arrived at El Chipote and asked to see the kidnapped young men that I knew that my son was alive. Bishop Rolando Alvarez, together with all the clergy of the Diocese of Matagalpa, celebrated a Mass outside of the Chipote for the freedom of the kidnapped and for the peace of Nicaragua. As the dictatorship was opening trials for the kidnapped, they were being transferred to the Modelo prison. The Catholic Church made arrangements so that we could see them. The visit took place in a large cell where there were many rusty iron bars. The condition of the cell was deplorable, very dirty. I saw my son tortured. His whole body was beaten and with many insect bites. Right next to us, there were some young men, maybe between 15 and 16 years old, and you could see the torture that they had been subjected to. I remember that one of them lifted up his pants and showed me his calf. It had been burned with acid, and he could not bend the fingers of his hands due to the tortures that he was subjected to. On July 13th, the Sandinista police attacked with firearms the students who were at the National Autonomous University of Nicaragua. The students took refuge in the Divine Mercy Catholic Church. With my husband, we went to try to help the wounded students, but we did not succeed. The police presence and the attack prevented us from entering. That day, 2 students died. In 2018, I suffered a direct attack against my physical integrity. I received a phone call informing me that there was an arrest warrant against me, and for that reason, I had to leave my country. All this accompaniment of the Church towards the people of Nicaragua has provoked persecution by the government. I hope that my testimony will serve as a basis for taking forceful action against the Ortega Murillo regime, and that Bishop Rolando Jose Alvarez will be freed, and that the persecution against the Catholic Church and the laity will stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I let the record note that before us is a mom who, through her tears, which the audience cannot see, is crying out for her son, for the other young people who were killed and tortured. As you just said, the use of acid, and that your son's body was so beaten and filled with insect bites. I mean, that needs to be known by everybody in this town and everybody around the world. So thank you for bringing that forward to us. The love of a mother is just incredible, and your testimony is so moving. Thank you. I'd like to now turn to Ms. Ullmer.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Wild, and members of the Subcommittee of Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations. Thank you for this opportunity to address the subcommittee as part of a follow-up to the March 22nd hearing calling for the release of Bishop Rolando Alvarez, who has become the courageous face of resistance in Nicaragua. I am honored to testify again in my capacity as Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the National Democratic Institute, and wish to express my solidarity with the brave former prisoners of conscience and the mother who accompany us here today. The fact that their faces are protected from the public's view here in the United States is emblematic of the state of repression in Nicaragua today. The ongoing expulsion, arbitrary deprivation of citizenship, arbitrary detentions, and illegal confiscations of the property of hundreds of Nicaraguenses. Critics, they highlight the seamlessly relentless repression in the country. As I mentioned to the honorable members of Congress in March, the situation in Nicaragua is deeply personal to me. My husband's name appeared first on the list of 94 Nicaraguans stripped of their citizenship on February 15. I'm happy to say that today he is a U.S. citizen. But the Ortega Murillo regime last week confiscated our house in Managua. I take inspiration from Bishop Alvarez's words that painful experiences like these do not happen in vain. As Nicaragua becomes increasingly totalitarian, its ties to China and Russia deepen. Nicaragua serves as a political and military base for these illiberal influences in Central America. In fact, the Ortega Murillo regime has been successful in advocating for China and Russia to serve as observers in regional bodies, including the Central American Parliament, Parlacen, and the Central American Integration System, SICA. In this regard, the Ortega Murillo regime threatens to broaden the influence of malevolent actors in Central America. NDI applauds important actions taken to date against Nicaraguan officials committing systematic human rights violations. Unfortunately, the Ortega Murillo regime continues to dismantle democratic institutions, erase the rule of law and fundamental freedoms, and consolidate its dictatorial power. It is essential to call out the ongoing crimes against humanity and violations of fundamental human rights and liberties endured by the Nicaraguans, including Bishop Alvarez. But we must not also forget about the 81 remaining political prisoners jailed since April 2018, including the mother who's here today. Their family members, as she just stated, are also suffering reprisals. The group of human rights experts on Nicaragua, tasked by the United Nations Human Rights Council to conduct investigations into human rights violations and abuses committed in the country since April 2018, expressed deep concern about the situation of Bishop Alvarez, who is in solitary confinement and in detention that gravely contravenes the Nelson Mandela rules for the treatment of prisoners. The U.S. and the international community should consider the following additional actions to continue to address ongoing human rights violations in Nicaragua. First, despite Nicaragua's recent formal withdrawal from the Organization of American States, the country and government remain bound to human rights obligations under international conventions, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which Nicaragua is a signatory. As such, ongoing investigations and public reporting by the UN group of experts remain crucial to ensure international scrutiny of the deteriorating crises and exert pressure on UN member states to demand accountability and justice for the victims of atrocities, particularly human rights abuses against indigenous and Afro-descendant communities. In particular, I want to call attention to the recent arrest of Brooklyn Rivera, a Miskito indigenous person and leader of the Yatama Party, right ahead of the March 2024 regional elections. As verified by the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, the status of Mr. Rivera's health and whereabouts are unknown. Second, the U.S. should work with democracies in the region to create a Friends of Nicaragua group to advance high-level regional dialogue toward a democratic transition. Furthermore, the U.S. should work with Canada, the European Union, and other allies to ensure coordinated, consistent, and a holistic response to the crises, including sanctions, which prioritizes human rights in consultation with the Nicaraguan civil society. Third, the U.S. government has diplomatic and economic tools to ensure international financing and trade are not propping up the Ortega Murillo regime, including the bipartisan NICA and Renacer Acts and Executive Order 14088. In this regard, the administration should fully use all of its tools at its disposal to sanction sectors that bolster the economic interests of the Nicaraguan regime, including CAFTA-DR. The U.S. rightly sanctioned Nicaragua's Attorney General earlier this year for confiscating property from the government's political opponents without a legal basis. The U.S. should also consider sanctions against the Nicaragua Central Bank for profiting from the confiscations, not only of Nicaraguans, but now of U.S. citizens, along with the private banks that have branches in the United States for either colluding with the regime, either directly or by their inaction. Fourth, NDI congratulates the administration for its recent action to restrict visas for the operators of aviation companies facilitating chartered flights for Cuban and Haitian migrants to Nicaragua from where they seek to a perilous travel to the north. The U.S. should also consider sanctioning the Nicaraguan Institute for Civil Aeronautics for participating in and profiting from these flights. Finally, NDI commends the bipartisan efforts by this committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to increase scrutiny of lending by the Central American Development Bank of Economic Integration, CABE. A new investigation by the Organized Crime and Corruption Report Project raises questions about the bank's lending practices to, quote, a club of friends who prioritize politics over sound investments and rely on the bank to access cheaper funding from international markets. The U.S. has an opportunity to work with the new and first woman executive president of CABE, Ana Gisela Sanchez from Costa Rica, to reconsider continued lending to Nicaragua until actions are taken to restore democracy. This will also send an important message to neighboring governments already demonstrating concerning authoritarian practices. I join with the Nicaraguans' calls with our former prisoners of conscience and the mother who is here today, and yours, Chairman Smith, to let Bishop Alvarez go. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ullmer. Thank you for that tremendous testimony, for that very important prescriptive list of actions that we, the House, Senate, and the executive branch need to undertake. And your thought, and I'll ask you a question about it, and I will go to Ms. Salazar, the chairwoman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, for her comments and remarks. And she is a tremendous advocate for human rights and freedom. But I thank you for calling on a collaboration with the other nations. Again, the idea of people looking askance and having compassion fatigue or anything like that, we need to double down rather than do business as usual. So thank you so much for that. It's proud to recognize our distinguished chairwoman of the Western Hemisphere Committee, Ms. Salazar.
Thanks to you, Mr. Chairman, and you are the distinguished one, Representative Smith, for putting together this hearing and always caring about the people from Nicaragua. I have asked you for permission to do this hearing in Spanish, because that way it's going to be easier for you. I know that you're going to have a translator, and if not, I can translate my words, but you have a translator. And because the reason why Chairman Smith asked me to do it in Spanish is so we can transcend the walls of the United States Capitol and get to the people of Nicaragua and to everyone who's interested in this beautiful country. So, voy a hablar en español para todo aquel que nos está escuchando. Let's see if...
Voy a hablar en español para todo aquel que nos está escuchando.
All right.
Oh,
so
sorry. I'm I'm sorry, Congresswoman.
Por
I will
eso
speak
quiero...
in Spanish for everybody that's listening into us outside of these walls.
Quiero poder entonces entrar en el ritmo
I want to get in a rhythm here
para que usted pueda
so
hacer la
that you can
traducción
do the
correctamente.
translation correctly for the rest of the members.
Esto es un hearing que el Chairman Smith está haciendo para el beneficio de todos los nicaragüenses que quieren ver libertad en su patria.
This is a hearing that Congressman Smith is holding for all those Nicaraguans that want to see freedom in their homeland.
Y le agradecemos a los tres que están aquí por su sacrificio.
We thank all three of you that are here for your sacrifice.
Lo que es inconcebible es que el régimen de Ortega se atreva a meterse con la Iglesia Católica, algo que ni siquiera el dictador Somoza hizo.
What is inconceivable is that Daniel Ortega meddles or interferes with the Catholic Church, something that not even the dictator Somoza was willing to do.
Y tiene a uno de los miembros de la Iglesia Católica más importantes preso hace un año.
And he's holding as a prisoner one of the most important members of the Catholic Church in Nicaragua for more than a year now.
Y mi pregunta es, ¿cómo Ortega sabe que puede hacerle eso a alguien tan importante en una institución
And my question is, how does Ortega know that he can do this to somebody of such importance in an institution
que tiene el doble de popularidad que el gobierno, que el régimen orteguista?
that is twice as popular and has more confidence than the Ortega regime in Nicaragua?
¿Cómo Ortega sabe que puede hacer esto?
How does Ortega know that he can do this?
Quien quiera contestar.
For whoever wants to answer.
I believe that in his mind that we're enemies.
He thinks that we're enemies among us. He thinks that us. He thinks that we have promoted that supposed coup d'etat. But my question really is this. When he was in prison, and many others like him, the Sandinista guerrillas, did he forget that it was the Catholic Church that interceded for his liberation and the liberation of all of them? In other words, the Catholic Church exists to defend human rights and the dignity of the human person.
Pero se le olvidó. He forgot. convenientemente.
very
Conveniently.
conveniently.
Y le reitero la pregunta. Él sabe que políticamente no tiene costo, o sí tiene costo en hacer lo que está haciendo en contra de la Iglesia Católica.
Is he acting under the knowledge that there is no political cost to pay for doing what he's doing to the Catholic Church, or does he know that there is a cost? He knows there is a cost, but he doesn't care. He just doesn't care.
¿Puede la Iglesia Católica sacarlo del poder? Y si es así, ¿qué puede hacer el Papa, la institución, como ocurrió con Somoza?
Can the Catholic Church get him out of power? And if so, how? Could they do it as it happened to Somoza? We can't. It's not our mission. We're not a political party. That's not what the role of the church is.
Pero el obispo Obando y Bravo sí logró en su momento que los sandinistas no ganaran el poder.
But Bishop Obando y Bravo, back in the day, did actually accomplish that the Sandinistas did not gain power through elections. I think that as a citizen, certainly that was the case, but in terms of the church as an institution, the doctrine of the church is not that. It is not our mission. We are not at war with any government. We just raise a prophetic voice.
El otro witness.
Our mission is to preach the social teachings of the church, nothing else. We are not a political party. Our mission is always to just preach the gospel with all its consequences, whatever they may be.
¿Cuáles son los puntos vulnerables de Daniel Ortega y de Rosario Murillo? Si no le temen a Dios, ¿a quién le temen?
What are the soft spots or vulnerabilities of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo? If they don't fear God, what do they fear? Nothing. Nobody. They themselves think that they are God, and that's it. They are afraid of losing power. That's it.
Finalmente, ¿qué pueden hacer los Estados Unidos para hacer que los nicaragüenses tengan democracia?
Finally, what do you think that the U.S. can do so that Nicaraguans can have democracy in their country? For me, the very fact that we're holding this hearing is incredibly important for us. Being such a small country, having this opportunity to rise up to an international stage and to make it known what is happening in our country. This already creates consciousness in our country that is different from what is seen through social media that are so tailored. Or tourists that visit our country and look at everything as if everything is normal and that nothing is happening, and that's not the case. That's it.
Si eso es así, entonces aquí estamos los dos chairmans de los dos subcomités,
If that is the case, here we are, the two chairmen of the two subcommittees
el de el hemisferio occidental
For the
y
Western Hemisphere.
y el de los derechos humanos.
and for human rights.
hablando claramente
speaking clearly
a la comunidad internacional
to the international community,
y sobre todo al régimen de Daniel Ortega y de Rosario Murillo,
and specifically to the regime of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo,
que nosotros no vamos a descansar
that we will not rest
mientras que estemos en esta posición
so long as we're in this position,
y no vamos a olvidarnos
and we will not forget
que son dos dictadores desalmados
that they are two heartless dictators,
y que se han robado el país,
and they have stolen the country,
un país que fue el granero de Centroamérica,
a country that used to be the grain provision for all of Central America,
que tuvo democracia gracias a Violeta Chamorro,
that had democracy thanks to Violeta Chamorro,
que se escapó del lastre de que son los sandinistas,
that was able to get away from the dead weight that are Sandinistas,
que ahora pueden estar nuevamente en el poder, pero no va a ser para siempre.
that maybe for now are back in power, but this will not last forever.
Y nosotros estamos comprometidos,
And we are committed,
los dos, y el
Both of
Comité de
us.
Relaciones Exteriores de los Estados Unidos,
and the full Committee of Foreign Affairs for the United
que
States
eso
of
sea así.
America, that this will be the case.
Do you agree? Absolutamente. Thank you, Chairman. You back.
You could go on forever. I deeply appreciate Chairwoman Salazar's incisive questioning and her passion and her unbelievably deep commitment to fundamental human rights, and that the people of Nicaragua deserve those rights. They deserve better than what they are getting now. And our witnesses clearly have made it so clear that there needs to be change. And I can tell you, notwithstanding the myriad of crises that we have in the world today, whether it be the challenges of conflict, Hamas, the problems we're having, obviously, in Ukraine, and the conflict there, the crimes against humanity and genocide being committed by Xi Jinping in Xinjiang, and other human rights abuses in China, the threats to Taiwan, all of it in no way, shape, or form crowds out our focus and our concern for the people of Nicaragua, for the bishop, for all of you. And we will redouble our efforts going forward. We're looking for additional levers. And again, thank you, Ms. Ullmer, for your recommendations on very specific things that we could be doing. And we will do it. And we're going to, I would just note for the record that John Sebastian Chamorro is here with us today. He was imprisoned because he was a candidate running against Ortega. His wife, Victoria, had testified at a hearing we had 2 years ago. He testified last spring. And these are the best and the bravest and the brightest of Nicaragua who are just calling for democracy and freedom. And all of you have paid such a price for it. And I just can't say how deeply respectful and encouraged we are by your ongoing resilience and strength. We will continue this effort. We're going to meet and talk about next steps. But right now we're requesting and appealing to Ortega to let the bishop go. And I think your point, exiled prisoner number 2, I'd love to say your name, but we know why, for reminding us how the church as peacemakers, the Beatitudes can't be clearer. When Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, you stepped in and helped Ortega himself as a church, as our church, because I am a Catholic as well. And as was pointed out by the parent of our prisoner of conscience, the church stepped in as peacemakers to protect the children, the young people, the students, and got a ceasefire. I mean, that's what the church does. As you said so clearly, you're not a political party. The church isn't a political party anywhere, but is a force for enormous good and compassion and love and reconciliation. So again, thank you for that. Do you have any further? Yes. further
Chairman,
questions?
the Bible also said that the devil is coming to kill, steal, and destroy, and resist it. So we are resisting devil, according to the scriptures. También la Biblia dice de que el diablo viene a matar, a robar y a destruir, y que lo vamos a resistir. Eso es lo que estamos haciendo, resistiendo a Satanás, que eso es lo que representa la señora Murillo y el señor Ortega. Son Satanás sobre Nicaragua. Y nosotros no somos perfectos, pero queremos estar cerca de la luz. Y esto es un mensaje directamente a Murillo y a Ortega. No vayan a pensar que van a salirse con la suya. Este señor tiene que ser libre. So
Thank
you
you.
can translate, just like, please do the translation.
I'm sorry, Congressman, I got caught up with your rhetoric, but
It's like the Bible says that you have to resist the devil because it comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And Murillo and Ortega are the devil on Nicaragua. So that's why we're resisting them. And the first thing that they should do is to let the bishop free. Let him out so he can come to the exile and continue living his life of serving the Nicaraguan people out of Nicaragua, something that he should not be doing. I do not understand why he has to go into exile. He was born in Nicaragua and he wants to stay in Nicaragua. So why does he have to leave? They are the ones who should be leaving. And you're back.
Sure. Okay. Let me just ask very briefly about that video that we all watched. And there was, the timeliness of it was interesting at best. As I pointed out in my opening comments, I have seen, because I have visited prisons and gulags for my entirety of my time in Congress. And there's always an effort to try to portray, incredibly humane conditions when you visit. They do put on a show. And that video, to me, seeing all of that food laid out for Bishop Alvarez was just a bridge too far. I mean, it was a Potemkin village, like I said in my opening comments. So maybe if you could speak to the prison conditions, you, a prisoner, mom of prisoner of conscience, your son, you pointed out just how horrific it was, and then the fact that he was tortured. I think people need to know that, and you did thank you for, and I know you spoke through your tears when you told us that, but people need to know the truth, and thank you for being a truth bearer on that. But that video, I watched that 3 times, and I said, are you kidding me? You think we're just going to say, oh, everything's just fine. He's sitting in a cushy chair, the television set is on, and there's platters of food right in front of him. He didn't look like he had much food before that, and he wasn't eating either. And again, and I don't want to repeat myself, but it reminded me exactly what I saw at Perp Camp 35 with Frank Wolf in 1989. I didn't mention this, but they even had in this so-called cafeteria, which the political prisoners there, including Nathan Sharansky, never saw. They had like when you go to McDonald's, you see the caloric count of every food item, the hamburger equals how many. They had that up there. And I said, who do you think you're kidding? So I just, if you could maybe speak to that video, if you would like. And about the bishop, I think there's been an attempt to confuse that somehow he wants to stay in prison. I don't think that's the case. He wants to be free. And I think, and that might mean coming here. It might mean going to the Vatican. But, as Congresswoman, Chairwoman Salazar pointed out, I thought of another scripture as he was speaking, when it said, what does it profit a man to gain the entire world and lose his soul? Is this all worth it? All this power and having, don't they have enough riches? Don't they have enough power, and as well as their cronies? Try reaching out to people and get in their shoes. A little empathy would certainly go a long way. But if you could speak to the video, I'd appreciate it.
Just as you have mentioned, Congressman Smith, that video is nothing but a show that's been put on by the regime. We lived it ourselves. When we had visitors at the prison, it was exactly the same situation. A room would be prepared so that the family members would feel at ease with our conditions and that they could see that we're all okay. They would ask them to smile for the cameras because there would be a picture taken of the visit. and that they should also smile. I mean, not just us, but also our family members. So we're fully aware that this is nothing but a show. I mean, even the food that was there was exquisite and not what we would receive. The day of our visit, we will always have that like spread of food laid out, but it was never given to us. What is very noteworthy is that the officers of the prison that would serve the food and would be very kind to us or nice when speaking to us in those days were the same ones that would later be at the courthouse testifying lies against us. I mean, speaking in my capacity as a family member of a former prisoner, the videos and the pictures are the biggest humiliation that we can get. Family members are submitted to abuse. Whenever we had the opportunity to visit, in going in, you would be fondled. Some women were stripped down naked. And I can definitely recall that in one opportunity, one mother was late to the visit. And they told her, if you want to give food to your son, you have to dance. You have to dance the song Daniel se queda, Daniel stays. The mom had to do it so that she could feed her son.
One question to Ms. Ullmer. You gave, again, that excellent prescriptive list of things we could be doing, and I thank you for that. You mentioned the importance of the central bank, and we've seen with Iran and with other sanctions that have been imposed by our government over the years, that's when you really get their attention. GSP, all those things are all important. The CAFTA, that would be an area, and I hope the regime realizes that we're just beginning. And you saw the passion of Chairwoman Salazar. I feel the same. She is, absolutely committed, has been doing this her entire life as well. So if you could maybe speak to and elaborate a bit on some of those actions that need to be taken.
Thank you for the question. I'd like to start off with the question that Chairwoman Salazar posed first. What are the vulnerabilities? I heard Juan Sebastián Chamorro behind me say they fear the population. All of this, the sham, all of the false information, the attacks against the Nicaraguenses, the fear I hear in these brave souls that are sitting next to me. They fear the population. This is what they fear. And again, I'm so grateful and so honored to be sitting aside them. What else can we be doing? I mentioned the central bank because I'd like to speak about my own personal experience. These criminals are trying to not leave traces of their illegalities. In confiscating our houses, they are not leaving any papers. They're telling, if we have tenants, they're telling our tenants that they have to sign new leases, but are not being provided what those leases are or the terms. Furthermore, they're being told to go and pay the central bank in person so that they won't have wire transfers or any paper trails. They will make mistakes, and we will document those mistakes. And this is why it's important to be documenting today the crimes that they are committing, because the population will regain their democracy. They will be able to go back to a free land. I'm certain of that, and that is what I'm dedicated to doing. What else could we be doing? I want to highlight the efforts of the Nicaraguans that are here not only in the US, but also in exile in Spain and Mexico and Costa Rica, and inside of the country of the brave souls that are still there and their family members that are still there. They're trying to find a common ground for peaceful change for when a political opening does occur. These efforts can be bolstered by sustained U.S. democracy assistance that supports journalists, civic, environmental, human rights, and youth activists, and the democratic opposition. To shine a light on the crimes against humanity, to monitor international financial bank loans, to disrupt information manipulation, to generate a consensus toward a democratic transition. A return to democracy, however, will only likely succeed when the Nicaraguan efforts are bolstered with international support. CABE has been playing an unfortunate role in supporting not only the Murillo and Ortega regime, but others that are becoming less democratic in Central America. I think we have a golden opportunity to now work with the new president who comes from Costa Rica to rethink the lending to Nicaragua. Thankfully, a UN environmental fund was recently stopped. I believe that was after the hearing in March, because we shined a light on what's going on with the indigenous lands and the settlers. It's important to continue the pressure and to really look at the bank lending. That's absolutely, we have voice and vote at the World Bank, at the International Development Bank. We have that influence. We need to also work with colleagues at CABE because they are bankrolling dictators. The sanctions, DR-CAFTA, that is something that the Nicaraguans are calling for. And we have been very careful to provide individual sanctions to really only harm the regime that are committing crimes against humanity, and not widespread sanctions. The Ortega Murillo regime has attempted over the past couple of years to manipulate the information as if we are calling for a widespread blockade, and that is not the case. The Nicaraguans need to understand that our sanctions have been targeted to individuals who are causing harm, including the Attorney General and others now at the Supreme Court, and what's left of the Supreme Court. There's a lot of change going on, and there is analysis within the country that the firing of almost 900 individuals at different levels, the Supreme Court, national and local levels, of judges, of administrative staff, they fear information getting out to other nations. They fear that their own officials who have worked in government and are now fleeing the country, they fear that the information is getting out. And now they are clamping down to the point of completely erasing the Supreme Court and moving all of their illegalities to the Attorney General's office, which is now judge and jury. There's a lot more work that can be done, for sure. And I thank you, both Chairwoman Salazar, Chairman Smith, and Ranking Member Wild, for all the efforts in keeping the light on Nicaragua.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to pick up right there. Speaking of information getting out, I'm very interested and concerned with the topic of freedom of the press. And in July 2023, a Nicaraguan journalist said, in Nicaragua, there is not a single independent media outlet that operates within the country. You're nodding your head. I take it you agree with that statement. Excuse me. Can you speak to any efforts by the regime to restrict or surveil internet use and other forms of digital information sharing?
Thank you for that question. Back in March, I believe I had mentioned that the Russians, according to the Pentagon and other sources, have set up satellites. I've seen the satellites for myself when I was there in 2019. With their new embassy and these satellites, The belief is that the satellites are there to not only surveil the opposition within the country, but they're also surveilling opposition throughout Latin America, or at least throughout Central America. There is no doubt in anyone's minds that the regime is working closely with Iran, with Russia, with China, to not only surveil their own, but also to replicate or manipulate information. The surveillance, however, has also started a while back ago through what they call community policing. Not community policing in what we believe in the United States, but it's to set up police block by block, and this is inspired by Iran and in Cuba, where basically they're informants to the party and provide movements. Hence, while these people were picked up, right, at 3 in the morning, they knew where to find folks, not only in their homes, but on the streets. That was also shown to be the case in 2018 when they were going after the students and their families. They were being surveilled. And so there's no doubt in my mind that that's happening. There is no freedom of press, of speech, of movement, of assembly that you can speak of anymore in Nicaragua.
So let me ask you this. Are there any effective pathways for the United States and international partners to attempt to protect independent media workers or outlets broadcasting and publishing independent coverage of events in Nicaragua?
Absolutely. Journalists today are circumventing this restriction. They're operating on the outside, and that's thanks to support by the United States of lifting the Nicaraguans' voices outside of Nicaragua and throughout the territories. That is one way to continue to shine a spotlight on Nicaragua. They're working from the outside.
Meaning they're not in the country?
They're not in the country
Okay, so
anymore.
that's how, because I was going to ask about their safety and well-being.
But they have journalists and they have their informants that they protect inside of the country.
And how can we best support that?
I think what we need to continue to provide democracy and civic government assistance. That is the best way to support organizations that work with the journalists, but organizations that also provide human rights protection mechanisms. Unfortunately, that means many times that these individuals have to leave their countries, and they can't stay in their country. They shouldn't have to leave their countries, but many times, for their own safety and protection, there are mechanisms now, but that is supported by the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and other mechanisms to protect these individuals.
If I could just ask one last piece of this question about journalism and freedom of the press. So it's encouraging to hear that the journalists are finding a way to circumvent it outside the country. But can we assume from the past testimony here and what you just told us about informants literally going block by block, that journalism is essentially unavailable to people in Nicaragua? I mean, it's more for the purpose of educating the outside world about what's happening in Nicaragua than it is in bringing truth to the residents and citizens?
I have to say, by the flood of WhatsApp messages I've just received, Nicaraguans are receiving the information inside.
Well, that's encouraging. I always like to end my questioning on an encouraging note, so I'm going to yield at this point. I may have other questions, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Matter of fact, you wanted to ask him now, that'd be great. 'Cause I'm
Sure.
just gonna
Great,
thank our
happy
witnesses.
to. I don't like to hog the time. So I will proceed. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Switching gears, not on journalism here. What avenues do you see for constructive engagement in defense of human rights in Nicaragua, given particularly the regime's increasing retreat from international fora and efforts to cut off contact, even banning the Red Cross? Obviously, it's encouraging that 222 political prisoners were released. to the United States, and 12 Catholic priests were released and sent to Rome, but it seems pretty clear that these individuals are likely to be stripped of Nicaraguan citizenship and perhaps tried for spurious claims of treason. And all of that is just obviously very, very concerning. So I'd like to know what you see as the best strategy for engaging on the defense of human rights. That's in many ways, the purpose of this subcommittee, to try to figure out how we actually help people who are suffering human rights abuses. So we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for the question. So as Nicaragua's isolation from regional and international organizations sort of reduces the checks on Ortega Murillo's power. But despite their withdrawal from the OAS, the government and the country remained bound to several human rights obligations under international instruments, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So ongoing investigations and public reporting by the UN Human Rights Group on Nicaragua is crucial to ensuring international scrutiny of the deteriorating crises and to exert pressure on UN member states to provide accountability and justice for the victims of atrocities, particularly human rights abuses that we've heard against women and the indigenous and Afro-descendant communities. The U.S. should also work with those democracies throughout the world, but particularly in Latin America. It took the jailing and not even the deaths, but it took the jailing of so many political prisoners, prisoners of conscience, and touching the Catholic Church for other members of this hemisphere to speak out. I think we now need to work with them to exert pressure. They're watching very closely, and they are human rights advocates. We need to be working with them to find other avenues to reach out and to pressure Ortega Murillo.
And you just made reference to the priests who were imprisoned. Do you think that that was key to the rest of the hemisphere taking note, as opposed to individuals outside the priesthood being imprisoned, which happens regularly and often?
In my personal opinion, yes. Yes. Given the history of Latin America, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your excellent testimony and the work that you do in this field. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Just a couple of things that we're putting on our radar is that when Nicaragua's Universal Periodic Review comes up next year, we want to be very, very focused so that other nations will raise, I mean, Human Rights Council has its drawbacks, but certainly the Universal Periodic Review provides an opportunity. We do raise these issues with other UN fora, including human rights, the High Commissioner there. So we're going to, if any of you wanted to speak to whether or not you think the UN has been responsive, that would be fine. Maybe, Deborah, you might want to do that. And just so you know, your testimonies are motivating. Mr. Chamorro's and his wife and others who testified previously. I mean, you let us know. I mean, you got your hand on the pulse as to what's happening, and it inspires all of us to do more. And it also gives us the direction we should be going in. And we're going to just redouble our efforts. I can absolutely assure you of that. We haven't let up, but that's why we're having this hearing, to say, let Bishop Alvarez go. I mean, it's absurd that he is being held the way he is being incarcerated for no crime. And I'm so glad you brought up Exiled Prisoner of Conscience number 2, that you intervened for him when he was in trouble. I mean, doesn't he remember that? Doesn't he care? There was a church. The church is for everyone. It tries to love and be a peacemaker for everyone. So thank you for reminding us of that, and I will remind others of that based on your testimony. And thank you for bringing that forward. But anything before we close that you would like to speak, including the UN?
Thank you. Yes, I can't stress enough that the expert group of human rights on Nicaragua is doing an important work. Their mandate has been extended to, I think, to April 2025. And that happened, again, after the last hearing in March. They are documenting important cases. They are documenting and reporting out to the international community what is happening, what has happened and what is happening. And so I think it's important to continue to work with this group of experts who are lawyers, they're human rights activists, so that they can continue to report out to the UN Human Rights Council. Unfortunately, we all know which members sit on the Human Rights Council, so we do need to do work beyond the council to really inform others who are human rights activists to lift their voices. EPU, the Universal Periodic Review, is, as you mentioned, Chairman, is a great opportunity to continue to shine light so that it's not just the regime that's speaking, but that they're hearing the truth from the Nicaraguan people. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to offer any further commentary before we close?
I just want to say on behalf of all three of us sitting here today, and on behalf of all Nicaraguans in exile, we're extremely thankful for the efforts that you're putting in.
Thank you so very, very much.
If I could just say it's our honor and our privilege to do so.
Absolutely.
If I may just add one last point, it's an important point. The 222 former political prisoners that are in the United States, we need to help them expedite their political asylum cases. They do not have benefits. They do not have benefits. And I know Chairwoman Salazar has put forth a bill. We are here to support that, to make sure that these important citizens, so that they can remain engaged in the future of their country, it's important that they have benefits, that they're able to make a living wage. They have work permits, but they don't have benefits, and they don't have citizenship. And their parole has only been granted for 2 years. It's important, please, to keep that in mind.
Thank you, and I'll just conclude with this. I did put together a letter that has gone over to the Secretary of State, and without objection, that'll be made a part of the record, which lays out a number of things we think state could and should be doing. And we do it in the spirit of partnership with the administration, and I do hope that they will take it seriously. And I would also point out the Alliance Defending Freedom has filed a petition with, on behalf of Bishop Alvarez, with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and without objection, that petition will also be placed in the record. And again, I thank you. God bless you, and we will persevere. And thank you for your sacrifices. They are not in vain. The hearing is adjourned.